Hey friends, I'm rerunning one of my all-time favorite interviews with Stanford-trained Dr. Casey Means. This is all about how to optimize your health and well-being, and it is a must listen. So many important takeaways from this conversation. So on that note, let's get into the show and enjoy your holiday. Here we go. Hey friends, it's Michele Lemereau and welcome back to the Good Life with Michele Lemereau podcast. Today we are going to be diving into understanding how to optimize our metabolic health. Joining us today is Dr. Casey Means, who's the author of the book, Good Energy, the surprising connection between metabolism and limitless health. In the promotion of the book, it says, what if depression, anxiety, infertility, insomnia, heart disease, erectile dysfunction, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, cancer, and many other health conditions that torture and shorten our lives actually have the same root cause? And the solution to prevent and reverse these conditions is under our control and simpler than we think, according to Dr. Casey. And the key is our metabolic function, which is the way we make energy in our cells and bodies. You guys, this is such a fascinating conversation, and we cover health a lot on the show, but I learned so much both from her book and from being able to sit with her and bring her wisdom and what she's learned to you. I highly recommend you pick up a copy of the book and definitely share this one with a friend. It's, like I said, a very unique conversation that we haven't had on the show, but once you learn more about, it makes so much sense. Dr. Casey Means is a Stanford-trained physician and co-founder of Levels, a health technology company with the mission of reversing the world's metabolic health crisis. And she received her BA with honors and MD from Stanford, was president of her Stanford class, and has served on Stanford faculty. She trained in head and neck surgery before leaving traditional medicine to devote her life to tackling the root cause of why Americans are sick. She's been featured in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Women's Health, and many more media outlets. And I know you're going to love this conversation. Definitely share this one with a friend. All of the show notes for today will be over at thegoodlifecoach.com and on your podcast player. And on both places, you can join the Good Life community newsletter where I share more tips and inspiration to live your best midlife. When you sign up, you'll get 52 self-care tips sent to your inbox. But more importantly, that's how we can stay connected, and you can just simply hit reply to the welcome email that I send and let me know what topics you want covered, or if there's any specific questions you want me to answer on a solo cast. I love hearing from you, and it is the best way for us to stay connected. So on that note, let's get into the show. Here we go. Welcome, Dr. Means. I am so excited to have you on the show today.
I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, we connected a little bit before the mics went on, and I was telling you how much I loved your book, Good Energy, the surprising connection between metabolism and limitless health. I kept nodding as I was reading your book. It was interesting. Like everything I was reading, it was just all resonating. And I'm not doing it all, but like it all made sense. And I think when we hear the truth, it's like our soul's like, yes, pay attention, pay attention. And that's what I was experiencing when I read it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I'm going to read one bit from the sort of the promotional piece, because I think this is important. It says, this is the most important project I've ever worked on because I believe that adopting a metabolic, quote unquote, good energy view of health is foundational to ensure the future thriving of humanity and for reversing the decimation of human health and by extension, planetary health taking place before our eyes. And one of the things that I noted from this book is that you really share so much of the science and the research and the facts about what's broken and needs to be fixed. And you also marry it with a beautiful connection to our interconnectedness and staying in a state of awe and appreciating the beauty of life. So, yes. So tell us about this calling you've had. And obviously it's connected to your mom, who the book is dedicated to, and unfortunately the path that she had to walk. that sparked this?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the real inspiration for the book, in many ways, was my mother's story, coupled with my story as training as a surgeon, as a head and neck surgeon, and really like spending over a decade of my life climbing that ladder of conventional healthcare system, Stanford Medical School, surgery residency, and then the really being on the patient side of my mother. And together, they really showed me so clearly that our system is just so broken. It's so broken. And we need a reimagination of what it can be because it's not actually incremental fixes that are going to help us truly heal as a society, as a group of individuals, as a community of, the whole. It's going to have to be a totally different way of looking at things. And so I summarize that in this good energy vision for the world that spans everything from the healthcare system itself to the way we even view our own bodies and what we are and our true nature on a much more, I would say, like philosophical level. And I'll just briefly share the story of my mother because I think so many people can absolutely relate to this. She's kind of like an archetype of what I think so many people and families are going through, which is being dependent on the healthcare system and so faithful to it, but being totally let down by it. She,
Yes.
she had me when she was 40. I was a huge baby. I was 12 pounds. She didn't get a gestational diabetes diagnosis, but I can be almost certain that she had it. You don't manufacture a 12-pound baby without some insulin resistance going on, most likely. She was, just like Sarah Gottfried was talking about in your last episode, she had this weight loss resistance after having the baby, which of course is another sign that she might have had insulin resistance. But everyone, her doctors told her, you're getting older, you just had a baby, this is very normal. Then she goes through menopause, very tough menopause. I remember it vividly,
Mm,
hot flashes, couldn't sleep, was sleeping in a different bedroom because she just was like sweating so much. No one said anything. There's nothing really that is offered to really
right.
help with menopausal symptoms. I think it's getting better. But then
Yes.
she gets into her 60s. She gets the diagnosis of high cholesterol, like so many Americans. 200 million prescriptions for ACE inhibitors for high blood pressure are prescribed each year. Then a few years later, it's high cholesterol, high blood pressure. She gets the statin. And then it's high blood sugar. So high cholesterol, high blood pressure, high blood sugar. She gets the metformin. And everyone's just saying, like, this is very common. You're getting older. And she is religiously seeing the doctors, taking the
Yes.
pill,
Yep.
going to all her specialists. And then she's 72 and she's taken a hike with my dad and she has this really bad pain in her belly and it lasts for a couple days. And she's like, this is unusual, goes to her PCP. They order a CT scan and it's stage 4 widely metastatic pancreatic cancer. And 13 days later, she was dead. And what was just shocking was that the doctors, they looked at us, these doctors who are at the quote unquote, best institutions in the world. She was being seen at Stanford. And at that time, she was also getting like executive physicals at Mayo. So getting great, quote unquote, great care, taking all her pills. And they looked at us and they said, oh my gosh, we're so sorry. This is so unlucky. And, I knew enough at this point to know like, wait, is it unlucky? Or was this like actually totally predictable? If we had looked at this through more of a root cause lens, were actually all of her things that she dealt with from having a big baby to bad menopause to high blood pressure to cancer really branches of the same tree, which
Mm,
from the metabolic, functional medicine perspective, we know that to be true on the physiologic cellular level. So many of these symptoms and conditions that are plaguing us are connected by physiology, but our system is just practicing such outdated medicine where we see everything in a silo and we play whack-a-mole medicine and there's a pill for every ill and all the specialists aren't talking to each other. And the unfortunate reality, and this is what I really saw in my own training as a surgeon, is that that is so interdependent with the financing of healthcare. The business of medicine, healthcare right now is the largest and fastest growing industry in the entire country, the biggest GDP in the world. And
God.
healthcare is a business that is the biggest and fastest growing. And by keeping all these conditions, the way we view them separate, it creates just customers for so many different specialists. And so because of that economic invisible hand, it keeps us very stuck in our siloed
Yes.
perspective rather than having any incentive really to put on those metabolic root cause goggles and actually see the tea leaves of what all these symptoms are saying. So that's really the story that, I think, unfortunately, I think so many Americans are dealing with. And the real message that I have to share is that we need a complete reimagination of healthcare that is focused fundamentally on connection rather than silos. And it's connection on so many levels. I would say three main ones. One is realizing that what the science is saying now
Yes.
is that metabolic dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction, a problem inside our cells with how they're fundamentally powering themselves, is either the direct cause or the accelerant of almost every chronic symptom and disease facing Americans in the Western world today. These symptoms and conditions are connected, and they're connected because of the way of our modern industrial environment are synergistically hurting our metabolic pathways, which is why these diseases have exploded over the past 100 years. The second piece of connection we need to realize is that our true nature, we are actually, as bodies, we are fundamentally interconnected with every single thing, every other thing in the world and the universe. Like, we see ourselves as these isolated bodies, but in reality, we're like buzzing hives of material that are constantly giving and exchanging matter with the outside world. We regenerate our gut lining like every week. Like, we're constantly recycling with everything around us. And because the system doesn't see the body that way as a
Yeah.
transformer, we see it
Yes.
as an isolated body. We are basing our whole healthcare system on a flawed view of what the body actually is, which is totally connected to everything else: air, water, food, soil, sunlight, even. So that's the second piece. And then the third piece is realizing that connection between humans in
Yeah.
loving, trusting, interdependent, not codependent, but interdependent relationships is actually foundational for our health. And things like social distancing and isolation are antithetical to biologic thriving. And we have to be moving away from our individualistic, isolated culture towards interdependent community, because it's literally a primitive threat signal to be lonely. And loneliness is an epidemic in our country. So good energy is a reimagination of a world of connection across every level of the healthcare system, our view of our body and society, that I think is really a very necessary and very attainable path forward for human health in the system.
Absolutely. And this is the system I want to live in. I want to live in good energy. I mean, for anyone who's gone to the doctor knows about those silos. You go for one thing and the doc sends your primary care sends you off to whatever. For me recently, I was telling Dr. Sarah in the last interview, like my arm wasn't working for like 3 months and it hurt to pick up a bag. And, they send you off to occupational therapy and then you've got different things. And I'm like trying to explain to my doc, who I love, I kind of need a partner because you have the training and the experience, and I just know what doesn't feel right and what's not working. So I love that you actually help us understand what labs to ask for and how to dig into it. But you covered a lot in that piece. So I'm going to break it down a little bit slower. So in the book too, you talk about that there's a better way, and it's understanding the biggest lie in healthcare is that the root cause of why we're aging, we're getting sicker, heavier, more depressed, more infertile is complicated. So the current medical system wants us to think it's complicated. And I love that you're like, actually, no, it's not. And then you write about the depression, anxiety, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, cancer, and other conditions being connected to that root cause, which is the good energy. So let's start with the title, what good energy is, metabolic health for anyone who's like just hearing that term or doesn't understand it.
Totally. This is what
Yes.
people need to know about metabolism. It's very simple.
Okay.
Metabolism is the most foundational process in our body. It's how we convert food energy from the
Yes.
food we eat to cellular energy. So it's a translation process of potential energy in food to a currency that we can use. And the body is a machine. We are about 40 trillion plus cells. Every single cell needs constant energy to be able to do its work. And our life is just the bubbling up of all of that work. So trillions upon trillions upon trillions of chemical reactions happening every second,
Wow.
all of which need energy to be paid for. That energy comes from metabolism. That's really all you need to know about metabolism.
Okay.
That process happens primarily in the mitochondria, which, as you remember from high school biology, is the powerhouse of the cell. And this is the second piece. We have over 200 cell types in the body. So you've got retinal cone cells, and you have hepatocytes in the liver, and you have glomerular cells in the kidney. You've got endothelial cells lining blood vessels. You've got glial cells in the brain. You have 200 cell types. Each one needs energy to function. A cell that is not properly powered will become dysfunctional, and all symptoms and diseases are necessarily the result of a dysfunctional cell.
Wow.
You cannot have a symptom or disease just arise out of thin air. It is necessarily the result of cellular dysfunction. And one of the ways a cell can become dysfunctional is if it's underpowered. And you can imagine underpowering core process in a glial cell in the brain is going to look different, a different symptom than underpowering an ovarian theca cell or a penile endothelial cell. It's going to look different. That doesn't mean it is different, right? On the cellular level, it's different on the manifestation level, the symptom level. So right now, because of our industrial, rapidly changing environment across all levels of life, across food and food systems, across the way we move, across the way we sleep, across the way we're interacting with media and news and technology, across the way we're interacting with light, artificial light and sunlight, temperature, the way we're interacting with toxins, 80,000 synthetic toxins in our environment in the past 100 years, across all those vectors, they are all hurting our mitochondria. So that's the phenomenon that's happening. 93% of Americans now have at least one biomarker of metabolic, i.e., mitochondrial dysfunction. And so stepping all the way back, putting that all together, we have a environmentally induced underpowering crisis in our bodies, and it's showing up as a lot of different symptoms because of the fact that we have all these different cell types. Outdated medicine, which when they were describing diseases, we didn't know all this, and so they described diseases based on symptoms, and we're still treating that way. And reimagination is to realize that we actually need to start defining diseases based on cellular physiology. And if we did that, we'd have to bucket like a lot of the diseases we're facing right now into one bucket, which is mitochondrial dysfunction, metabolic dysfunction, and what I talk about in the book. And so that's what's happening, and not how we're practicing medicine, which is why in our reactive whack-a-mole symptom management, long-term management, surgery intervention-based approaches, the more we're spending on healthcare, and literally the more access we have to healthcare, the worse the outcomes are getting in America. Like we're literally spending 23% of the GDP of the largest country in the world on healthcare, and we're getting sicker every single year. So that kind of describes why, is because we're throwing money at the downstream manifestation of a problem, which obviously won't heal it, rather than updating our model and hitting inside the cell. Now, the thing is, there's really not medications. There's obviously not surgery that can get to the inside of the cell. I mean, medications can go inside cells, but there are really not medications that optimize mitochondrial function. This is about changing our environment to unbridle, to unleash the strain we're putting on the mitochondria so that it can do its work, powered body, more functional body, less symptoms. And that's the vision.
That's the vision. And that's also the challenge, because like you just said, the healthcare industry is the largest industry. And you even used a term in the book that I recognize working in a law firm, which is eat what you kill. Lawyers talk about that all the time. I hate that expression. What?
Oh, I didn't
yeah.
know that.
Yeah. That was
so dark.
It's so dark. And yes, it's so when I had heard that, I'd never heard it in the context of in the medical system. But yes, lawyers say eat what you kill because they get rewarded based on how much business they bring in. And so that's part of the challenge, is that the current system is so dysfunctional. I mean, you're talking about dysfunctional mitochondria. The system itself is dysfunctional, and you're trying to wake people up and help them understand. So let's go into some more specifics of your story too, because you're talking about functional medicine. I've had functional medicine doctors on the show. We talk a lot of times people come on because they've had their own challenges with the conventional medicine system, and that's why these docs have switched over. So what was the tipping point for you when you were practicing?
My turning point was in my fifth and final year of my surgical residency. So I'd done 4 years of medical school, completed 4 years of surgical residency, and I'm in my last year of surgical residency, accepting like a job offer to essentially launch into the world as someone who, like you said, is going to have to eat what they kill. This is such a dark saying. And for people who don't really know what that means, it basically just means for like someone who's a fee for service, like person, like a doctor or a lawyer, you're going to make the money. The more you do, the more you're going to make. And so, I would just like to say, I don't think that surgeons are necessarily like pushing surgeries on people who don't need them. But when you have a hammer, like everything looks like a nail. And so it does shape our brain, I think, to see like, oh, you have a problem? Well, I have a surgery, and it's well-intentioned, but, I mean, economics are an invisible hand. There's no question. So for me, I'm in that fifth year of residency, and I remember there was one patient who I speak about in the book who was a sinusitis patient, and she was older and she was overweight and had prediabetes, and she had some depression and she had arthritis, and she had, like a lot of these common American things. And, when you're looking at someone pre-op, you look at all health conditions.
Yes.
But she also had recurrent sinusitis, and we're in there and we did the sinus surgery, which is like, busting open the sinus, drilling holes literally in the skull, sucking out inflammatory pus. We take her to the post-op area, and she's like, so looking at me like, thank you, you saved me. Like, I'm so grateful. And I just remember feeling like I did not in any way save this person. Like, she still has all these other conditions that I don't even think about. Like, it's not my job. It's actually, I'm disincentivized to think about her other problems because of liability, right? We're so special. And I thought, here I am, and she's putting all this faith in me, but like, she's still a sick person, and I haven't healed her. I have literally done plumbing on her face. And yes, of course, that might relieve some of her sinus pressure and her symptoms, but she is not a healthy person now. And it kind of struck me like I went into medicine to create health, to really help people reach their highest purpose through vibrant health. And that was not what I was doing. And what's more, like, I kind of had a wake-up call as well that was like, I didn't really understand why she was sick. I would say that I felt super confident in the surgery. I felt super confident in the treatment plan and my documentation and understanding the interventions we were doing. But there was like this big missing piece that I'd never really realized, which was like, she has an inflammatory nasal condition, sinusitis, inflammation of the sinuses. Inflammation is fundamentally the immune system responding to a threat. That's what inflammation is. It's the immune system thinking there's something wrong and getting activated.
Yes.
But I had never once thought about, well, what is the immune system responding to? Like, why does she have inflammation? What is the problem here? So when I realized, like, one, I wasn't really creating true health and thriving. And two, while I knew a lot, I didn't really know what was causing the diseases. I think in the system, you really get very, I don't want to use the word brainwash, but like you start at the place of, oh, the disease is there. So now we start to do stuff. You don't step back and say, well, why is the disease there? And so that's the part that I was like, I need to go there. I have to go towards that. And I don't think I can do that inside the system. So I left and I literally quit my residency, which was dramatic. But I started actually feeling like sick in the operating room. Like, I just was like, I feel like there's something else we could be doing here to keep him off the operating room table. And I have to go explore that. So I left, and that led me down such a beautiful journey of my purpose, which is to really think more about the inside of the cell, which led me straight to metabolic dysfunction. Because when we go back to that question of threat, like what is the body afraid of by
Right.
mounting an inflammatory response? In our modern world, what could be more scary to a cell than not having enough power to do its own work? And
Wow.
so the way that metabolic dysfunction is tied to this chronic inflammation sort of epidemic, a lot of people kind of, I think, know now that so many of our chronic illnesses are based in chronic inflammation. But the layer deeper to that is what's causing that inflammation. And then I think a lot of us who are aware of functional medicine think, okay, well, it's diet and lifestyle. Yeah, but why? And the
Right.
reason for the why, which is really what this book is about, is because the diet and lifestyle are hurting the cell's ability to make energy, the cells becoming underpowered. And that is a profound trigger of fear in the body that recruits chronic inflammation and creates this vicious cycle. So there's such an interdependent link between mitochondrial dysfunction, metabolic dysfunction, and chronic inflammation that is just this revolving door that's a vicious cycle that's underlying so much of the disease we're seeing today.
And you said 93% of people have at least one biomarker
Of metabolic
of
dysfunction.
metabolic. But this is going to be hopeful because your book is hopeful and you give us a plan. But let's go more into, yes. Feel free to say more on
No,
that.
no, it's actually very optimal. The beauty of all of this is that you can impact mitochondrial function and metabolic health, and it's quite simple. So
Yeah.
that's really the message. But we can get there, at some point in the episode. But yeah, no, it is a story of optimism for sure.
You're like, it's not normal for 74% of the country to be overweight or obese, for 50 million people to have autoimmune disease, or for 25% of children to have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's not normal for the leading cause of visits to the doctor to be vague feelings of being tired. So take us more into like all the brokenness in terms of the stats that we do know and the pharmaceutical sort of incentives that some of the doctors have to prescribing that with, some of the history, just so we have an understanding of what's some of the dysfunction that's happening within the actual system, what's broken.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, a lot of writing this book was really going to the research and looking at, for so many of these conditions that are plaguing us today across a wide spectrum, where is the data of the physiology? Like, what is really, really happening that's causing these diseases? And what you find is that, like, the data is really clear that this mitochondrial dysfunction, this chronic inflammation, these core processes are actually super related to these downstream manifestations. So, in terms of the spectrum of disease, and the burden and what people might be experiencing, it's important to realize that it can be things that are kind of these like earlier in life annoyances that we have up to like the later stage in life, like really lethal things. But we really need to start understanding that some of these early warning signs, which many of which are chalked up to normal in American culture, like, oh, of course I have migraines every once in a while, or they actually could really be warning signs of these processes in the cell that could lead to a bigger problem or develop into a bigger problem in different cell types later in life. So we want to make sure we understand those early spectrum things so we can
Yes.
really clue in. And so to just, one thing a caveat I'll say is that my thesis here is not that this is the only cause of these symptoms, because there's a lot of things that can create cellular dysfunction, but I believe that this metabolic dysfunction is such a contributor. So if you have the conditions I will mention, it's worth barking up that tree to see if that's part of it. Because if it
Yes.
is something that you can affect, which is great. So
Yeah.
from those sort of like earlier stage things, maybe younger in life, we're talking about, infertility. The leading cause of infertility in the US is polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is fundamentally a metabolic issue. Erectile dysfunction. Sarah Gottfried says erectile dysfunction is atherosclerosis of the penile artery until proven otherwise. So it's essentially just like a blockage, which is a metabolic issue. It's basically heart disease of the penis. Migraines, fibromyalgia, many autoimmune diseases are directly tied to mitochondrial dysfunction. Dr. Terry Walls talks about this at length. She actually, in her famous TED talk, Minding Your Mitochondria, she talks about how autoimmune disease is fundamentally a mitochondrial disorder. We're talking about gout. We're talking about depression and anxiety Chris Palmer, Harvard psychiatrist who wrote Brain Energy, actually makes the case that every mental illness that we're dealing with is fundamentally a metabolic brain energy disorder.
Wow.
Um, so in so many skin conditions, acne, premature aging, wrinkles, psoriasis, eczema, alopecia areata. So really any system we could talk about, there's something there. Then moving on to like the real like things that are gonna kind of immediately or really lethal things, stroke, heart disease, Alzheimer's dementia, type 2 diabetes, cancer, chronic liver disease, chronic kidney disease, and of course, increased propensity to die of infectious diseases. So, influenza, COVID-19, pneumonia, if you have underlying metabolic dysfunction, your risk of being hospitalized and dying is so much higher. Then there's other things, in the ENT world, I learned as I was digging into this that like people with diabetes have twice the rate of sinusitis, and hearing loss is fundamentally very related to insulin resistance, which makes sense because there's so much high energy intensive complex signal processing with sound that, of course, if you have underpowered hair cells in your cochlea, it's going to impact your ability to hear. And so that's a little bit, that's a little bit of the branches of this tree. And of course, genetics are involved. Of course, age is involved, but this is a path we should each pursue. And so what I would say is that if you have any of those diseases or symptoms I just mentioned, and I would argue any disease or symptom, we need to understand, just as Americans living in this world today, what our level of metabolic health is. We need to understand it for ourselves. We need to be able to say, this is where I am on the metabolic spectrum from a biomarkers perspective, so that we can work to optimize it if it is not part of that 6.8% of people who are categorized as metabolically healthy. So that's the journey. I would say if you're not feeling well in any way, go down that road because it may lead you to some really, really great outcomes. And if it doesn't, then at least you know that you're doing well from a metabolic and you can cross that off. Yeah.
Right. No, this is so good. Okay. Well, let's talk about some of those tests because you list 13 in the book. You say there's 5 that during your annual well visit, your doctor should be willing to give you.
Yeah. This is great because it doesn't need to be complex, fancy, expensive testing to get a sense of where you are on that metabolic spectrum. You can literally just get the 5 biomarkers that make up the metabolic syndrome criteria. And these are generally free on an annual physical. So those are fasting glucose.
Yes.
Fasting triglycerides, HDL cholesterol, waist circumference, and blood pressure. And the study from 2019 that was out of UNC that was one of the first alarming studies that actually said that only 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy. That was looking at those 5 criteria, which essentially, if you had a fasting glucose less than 100 milligrams per deciliter, triglycerides less than 150 milligrams per deciliter, HDL cholesterol above 40 for men or 50 for women, waist circumference less than 35 inches for women or 40 inches for men, and blood pressure less than 120/80, then you were part of that 12% and not on any medications. So not on medications for any of those biomarkers. So if you were on a cholesterol medication, it kind of immediately put you out of that 12%. So if all 5 of those were in that, what they called a normal range.
Yes.
That was considered metabolically healthy. Then more recently, there was actually a study in the American Journal of Cardiology that is the one that talked about the 6.8%. And that was looking at slightly different criteria, which I'll run through. So basically, to be the 6.8%, it was a body mass index less than 25.
Okay.
Waist circumference less than 88 centimeters in women or 102 centimeters in men, which I believe is 35 inches and 40 inches. Fasting glucose less than 100. So that's the same from the other one.
Yeah.
Hemoglobin A1C less than 5.7%. That's also a standard test.
Yeah.
Total cholesterol to HDL ratio. So basically on your cholesterol panel, there's total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, and triglycerides. This is saying take the total number over HDL. And that had to be less than 3.5 to 1. Blood pressure less than 120/80, and then no history of any like metabolic cardiovascular diseases. So if all of those were true, which are very similar, so there's obviously overlap there, but they add in like BMI and the total cholesterol to HDL ratio, but everything else is pretty similar. If those were all true, it was now a few years after that UNC study, it was 6.8%. And so each of those, for different reasons, each of those biomarkers, which are again, free, easy, your doctor will never fight you about ordering those. They're very standard.
Okay.
You can obviously get into much more advanced metabolic testing, but like at a very bare minimum, everyone listening should look at all those numbers and see where they fall into those ranges that I just said. We should really be doing everything we can to get there. Each one for a different reason gives you a clue about what's happening on those metabolic pathways. And it gets a little technical to get into why each one, like glucose and triglycerides, each represent a manifestation of mitochondrial dysfunction, but together as tea leaves, they can tell you a lot. And there's a lot of information we can link for people to kind of dig into like, okay, well, why does triglycerides tell me about mitochondrial dysfunction? But it's actually, it's quite simple and it's something that everyone can understand. And just to quickly just speak to that one, it's like if the mitochondria is not converting food energy in the form of glucose to ATP effectively to energy, if that process is broken, it's going to build up glucose and that glucose is going to turn to triglycerides. So that's what's going to happen. So just two of the biomarkers there, it makes sense. Okay, if there's a block in that flow, you'll get rising levels and they'll convert to a fat. And so there's a reason why each one tells you about mitochondrial dysfunction. But the key point is to really understand that it's your responsibility to understand these markers and to know exactly where you fall, because the healthcare system isn't prioritizing metabolic health. So we each have to, and we can. It's not that complicated, I promise you. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. What you just shared, honestly, is life-changing because that's accessible. Like you said, your doc isn't going to give you pushback on these. Yeah. And you know what's funny is as I was reading your book, I was like going into my health records to like, I was doing the triglycerides over the HDL, and I was like, okay, am I good? I was surprised. I do my blood work every year, and I missed last year. I've never missed a year, so I'm due. And in a way, I'm glad because the orders are in, and now I know there's a couple more I need to ask for. So this is why you're here. We want to empower the women listening to take ownership of their lives and to do this. I was curious about the HDL over the LDL. So I think LDL is the one everyone says, oh no, you don't want that to be high, but you focus on HDL. Can you just explain why? You talk about it in the book, but I love to hear it from you directly.
Yeah, I mean, part of it, it's so interesting because we talk so much about LDL in our culture as the bad cholesterol. But what's really interesting is that even the powers that be who make up the metabolic syndrome guideline, like the criteria that I just mentioned, LDL is not in the metabolic syndrome criteria. It's triglycerides and HDL. HDL is very important because it actually takes cholesterol from the bloodstream back to the liver for processing and excretion. So that's one of the ones that we want to be really high because it's actually a marker of more capacity to take the cholesterol out of the bloodstream and process it. And it's not, cholesterol in and of its own right is not really a problematic molecule. It's a totally biologically necessary molecule. But if we have a body that's metabolically dysfunctional, which is of course going to then have inflammation and high blood sugar, which is going to stick to the blood vessel lining, you end up getting gunk, building up on the blood vessel lining. And that's when cholesterol can become such a bad problem because it's going to stick to that. And so it's that mix of high cholesterol plus inflammation plus vascular wall dysfunction that creates these plaques that of course cause heart disease. But HDL is great because it's going to take some of, it's going to help clean up that process. And LDL is in many ways not the best marker in and of itself because the LDL class of particles, cholesterol particles, actually has subtypes within it, some of which are associated with heart disease and some aren't. So there's two types, small density LDL and large density LDL, both of which are in the one LDL number you get, they're both in there, but it's actually the small density LDLs that are the ones that are most causative of heart disease. And so because of that, and what's so interesting is that what promotes a shift towards more small density LDL is sugar. It's not fat. It's actually insulin resistance and blood sugar and having the metabolic dysfunction. So LDL doesn't give you a complete picture of your risk in a way. And
Yeah.
in studies, people with very, very high LDL certainly have higher risk of heart disease. Because, of course, if you have very high LDL, your small dense fraction is going to be big no matter what. But for people in that sort of lower, normal, slightly high range, it's a bit more complicated because if they have a really high concentration of the pattern of LDL that's less atherogenic, causing
Yes.
heart disease, then it might not be as much of a risk. And something that you can do is then understand more about your insulin sensitivity through testing a fasting insulin. The thing that you can do to really clarify this for yourself is to ask your doctor to order you what's called advanced lipid testing, which is essentially like an expanded fancy cholesterol panel. It's sometimes called NMR spectroscopy cholesterol testing, which will tell you your exact numbers of the small density or high density LDL particles. And so you can really like understand more what that cardiac risk is. And then triglycerides are, interestingly, triglycerides have been talked about like much less than LDL, but they actually have a higher association with heart disease than LDL. And I think, I'll speak to what Robert Lustig, who wrote the book Metabolical, talks about, which is that the reason we talk more about LDL than triglycerides is because we have a drug for LDL and we don't have a good drug for triglycerides. So it kind of gets ignored. But triglycerides actually have a very high association with heart disease, and we want to get that number down. Triglycerides, the way I think about it really is like they are a repackaging of excess glucose in the bloodstream into fat for storage form. And so the best way to get triglycerides down is to just cutting all the liquid sugar, all the refined added sugar, and all the refined ultra-processed carbohydrates. I've seen triglyceride levels drop 150 points in 3 months just by cutting refined grains and refined sugar, juices, sodas, frappuccinos. It's incredible what happens when you drop your refined carbohydrate consumption on triglycerides. It's one of the most empowering and actionable biomarkers. What I said earlier was that the metabolic syndrome criteria says to be less than 150 milligrams per deciliter. In my patients, I wanted to see a triglyceride less than 100 or even less than 70, because that's actually where the lowest risk is. And it's incredible how easily you can get there if you cut the refined sugars and refined carbs. They just drop like a rock. So that's a little bit about triglycerides, HDL, and LDL.
Thank you. I appreciate that because we always hear about the LDL piece and not so much about the good
Yeah.
cholesterol. I know for my family, my dad said our HDL is genetically like it's higher, so that's good. It's just part of the
Mhm.
genetics. He said that's so. It's nice to also know family history sometimes too, isn't it? That's helpful, isn't it? Or not as much?
So yeah, I mean, certainly it's helpful. I think we lean too much on thinking about family history because in some ways it causes a lot of patients to end the conversation about what they can do to actually and I also just sort of wonder how much the system has just pushed a narrative around how important family history is, because it's very disempowering. It's like, oh, well, this is the way I am. And the reality is that people can drastically change their metabolic biomarkers and their heart disease risk by making pretty simple lifestyle changes. And so, yes, it matters, but lifestyle and behavior and choices and diet matters more for sure. And like we talked about a little bit earlier, like I think the healthcare system really wants us to think it's complicated and hard to get healthy when it's actually not. And that by us being in that fear state of disempowerment, it just absolutely fuels our consumption of healthcare services. So yeah. So yes, it matters, but I would say
I
the
love
choices
this.
matter more.
I love
Yeah.
this. This is good. This is really important. And it's really like you're saying, take control and there's more things you can do to empower your health in the right direction. You wrote that I saw this study, by the way, in 2022, a nutritional study was founded by the NIH, the Gerald and Dorothy Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy at Tufts, and processed food companies, which listed Lucky Charms healthier than ground beef. And I remember seeing this, and at first I thought it was a joke
I
because
know.
there's some of the foods that were on there. I'm like, is this a joke? Like, is this
Yeah.
April Fool's? Like, is it April 1st today? Like, I was trying to, and I'm like, oh my God, this is like supposed to be a legit study. So part of the problem is that the information that's getting out, and just like you wrote in the book, if the Surgeon General just came out, just like they did about smoking and said, hey, sugar's bad, like don't give your kids all this ultra processed foods, it would help so many people, but they're not speaking.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, I mean the why is so complicated. I mean, I think the simple is money, but not in the direct nefarious way that someone
Yes.
might think. I think it's that you have the way the healthcare system is set up from the beginning, from the financing, bleeds into shaping the way we look at everything, the way we look at fragmenting the body into all these separate parts, 42 plus medical specialties at this point who don't really talk to each other. And then you start to really seed this idea of fragmentation and symptom-based approaches to healthcare into people's minds, from the earliest biology class they're taking. So you get these great minds, these eager minds who have lenses on to only see the body one way. So it's like money leads to a framework. The framework then becomes how we pursue research and how we pursue guidelines and the way even research is done, and then because drugs in large part are focused on these organ specific, disease specific biomarkers, you end up doing all this research on you know, basically like how a particular drug is against a placebo. So you think about what is the pinnacle of research in the American system? It's the randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study. But think about that for just 1 second. The only way you can have a placebo-controlled study is if you're testing a pill. Because if you think about it, if you're doing an exercise intervention, the placebo, you can't really do it because the person knows they're not exercising. So everything baked into every level of the way we do research, publish research, are educated, it's based on a premise that is corrupted by the financing system of healthcare. And just think about this, if all of a sudden the financial model were different, where instead of paying for doing things to people, we paid for health outcomes. So basically, let's say a doctor would just get $100,000 check if they cured a patient. And by cure, I mean their cellular physiology was totally restored and they have zero symptoms, zero medications, and feel incredible, limitless, happy, joyful. Like that patient is spit out of their office, truly healthy. And the doctor got $200,000. Everything would change. Everything would change. We would start to actually try to figure out how to actually restore the health of that patient. So now, in terms of the why of why doctors aren't speaking out, I think when you have been through a system and doctors work so hard and nurses work everyone's working so hard, they're in so much debt, they have sacrificed everything. I've seen so many broken families in healthcare, people spending 80, 100-hour weeks in the hospital. You give everything. So then where is the incentive to step back and actually question whether the system is doing it wrong? There's really not. Not only is your paycheck dependent on believing that the system you're working in is right and kind of demonizing other approaches, but you also, on an identity, I think in spiritual level, it's just such a hard thing to step back from this washing machine you're in, especially when your office is full. There's 40 patients a day coming through your office and they all
Right.
feel like they need you and want you. So you do really, you are doing something for them. And I respect doctors so much, but I think the whole system has created it's such a trap. And burnout and suicide rates are highest for doctors. And I'm not surprised by that because I think not only is the work so hard, but there's a lot of fields that have hard work. I think there is on some level a spiritual, just total hollowness, knowing that you're in a system that is so big, it feels really hard to change. And that so many of your patients just are not actually truly getting better. And how devastating is that? It was devastating for me. And so that's a little bit of an answer to a why. And I think what I'm hoping with this book is that in a sense, it's taking someone and just trying to like rip them out of that washing machine or slumber and be like, it actually is possible for us to create a different system, and it's not that complicated and everyone could win, like I actually think in many ways, like huge industries, like it could still be a very profitable industry, but what if all that profit was going towards the incentive of making people super healthy,
Yes.
So anyways, that's a little bit of the why, but
No, I
it's
love it.
multidimensional, and it's a lot of it's rooted in money.
Absolutely. And I have friends who are doctors and surgeons, and I have so much respect and appreciation for everything that they do every day. And I think, like you said, they care deeply about helping the patients, and they're just within the system, and it's structured the way that it is. And right before I interviewed you, I had on Dr. Gladys McGarry, who's a 103-year-old
She's amazing.
mother
Oh,
of holistic medicine. Second time she's been on, and I love her so much. And she said, we have a physician within, which is really what you're speaking to. It's like, take the information and then get connected to the part of you that that is empowered to take, that has the information and can do what it needs to do to heal. Like, we can't, that the medical model thinks that they're the ones that are going to heal the patient. And it's really up to, it's our bodies have the wisdom if we
oh,
fuel them right.
they do. And I joke in the book, we're the only species on planet Earth with, experts and PubMed and the NIH, and we're the only species on planet Earth with a chronic disease and obesity epidemic. Like, there is something about the problem that is putting all the agency outside of us, that is being asked to literally divorce ourselves from our common sense and our internal deep intuition and knowing. And it's very bad, because the body is constantly talking to us. It's talking to us through symptoms, through intuition, and we've basically been told to ignore that. Think about two realities here. Last 5 years, plastered practically on billboards, trust the science. It, what is the subtext of that? The subtext of trust the science is don't trust yourself. And where did that get us? We're getting sicker every year. And then look at like a different trend, which is like, okay, you have a symptom. Like, what is the purpose of CVS? It's literally to go there if you have any symptom and pull something off, pull a box and crush that symptom, because symptoms are intolerable to us. So we have been basically on so many levels told what your body's telling you is wrong. It's not, it's a problem, as opposed to, this is information, this is communication between your higher self and your biology that you should listen to, and then tune in to what feels like a good direction to go in. And now that's literally called pseudoscience. Like, that can get you blocked on Instagram for literally saying something like to be like, to trust your body and your body's signals. So there's something definitely about the way we're being told to relinquish all common sense and internal deep knowing, and then couple that with our technological world where we're constantly on our phones, we're constantly indoors. We spend 93% of our time indoors and 80% of our time sitting. So we're basically choosing, despite being miraculous, the only bipedal primate on planet Earth who can walk and walk on 2 feet. We choose to lock ourselves in a box, sit in a chair, and
So
stare at a
true.
screen, and we can't hear our bodies. And then when our bodies does say something, we're told to squash it immediately. Heartburn, take the Nexium. Arthritis, take an Advil. Headache, take the NSAID. It's like, you've got a little bit of redness on your hand, put some hydrocortisone on it. You've got a zit, put some salicylic acid on it. It's like, what are these things telling us? They're telling us that there's dysfunction. And the way that we can heal that dysfunction is through our choices. And so it's every level. It's every level. But the message that I want to share with people is that, we need to recognize that symptoms are a gift. We need to recognize that we are miraculous once in eternity, literally once in eternity. We will never exist. We are, the Big Bang happened and matter spewed out throughout the universe, and somehow it's formed into us for a short period of time. And we are each total miracles who have so much knowing, who are deeply connected with everything. And we need to trust ourselves because we know a lot. And and on top of that, the beauty of this exact time that we're living is that we actually have tools and technology to understand more about our bodies than we ever have before. So I very much deeply believe in like intuition and internal knowing and body awareness and slowing down so we can hear the signals and seeing symptoms as a gift. But I also think, yeah, we do live in a technological age, and there are tools that can let us personally see inside our bodies in ways we never have before. So let's leverage that too. So this is like wearables, continuous glucose monitors, direct to consumer lab testing, incredible technology that allows us to own our health without having to go through the gatekeeper of a doctor. So it's the merger of those two realities that we have right now of like the more spiritual, deeper wisdom plus the tools and technology that actually give us the opportunity to be totally empowered to have the happiest and longest lives in human history. But it involves waking up and going down that path. So.
And your book is that wake up call. It's interesting because you wrote that in 22 states, patients don't own their medical records. Did you know that in California, when your kid turns 12, they shut you out of your kid's record?
No. No, and that's unique to California.
I don't know. I think I have friends in Massachusetts who say that it's the same thing. I went to go in, like my daughter had had her well visit at the age of 12. And then at 13, I guess, I don't know, I went to log in to print out, I don't know, vaccine or something I needed to get for the school. And they're like, I'm sorry, you don't have access to your daughter's records anymore. You have to get her permission. And I'm like, this is insanity. This is insanity that you're cutting the parent out. Like, do you think my kid's scheduling their appointment and on top of this stuff? So there's a lot of problems. Let's give, because since we're coming to the end of the time, just like a couple of proactive things. You write about so many, everyone needs to pick up the book. Like there's so many amazing things. I'll let you pick whether it's movement. I love the movement part. Maybe it's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, are you standing, by the way?
I am.
I knew it. I was like, oh, she's standing, which is so like you're literally walking your talk as we're doing this right now. Now I feel like I should get a standing desk. My husband's always like it.
I love standing desks so much. Oh my gosh. Well, why don't I just start by sharing one fact from the book that I love about standing desks? Well, first I'll just back up about like the real framing for movement that I talk about in the book, which has been such an unlock for me, which is that the concept of exercise in some ways, I think actually is the problem with why we're getting actually sicker, because what we've done is we have created a built environment and a culture where we spend 80% of our time sitting. And then we basically sell people solutions through all these different exercise strategies to make exercise this thing that you check off your to-do list. And that's somehow, it's just this thing that you check off and now you've got in your movement. Yes. But that is actually not what makes you healthy. Because if you're sitting most of the day, it does not, it negates the positive benefits in many ways of exercising. Our bodies, the biology of the human body is meant to be in motion all throughout the day. In the simplest way to think about it is that when your muscles contract, there's an intracellular signaling cascade that literally pushes glucose channels from the inside of the cell to the cell membrane. And so you can imagine, just imagining that. So you've got glucose channels that are moving from the inside of the cell membrane, which means more glucose flowing in, more mitochondrial activity. If you're a person that's sitting most of the day, all that time, you're not pushing those glucose channels out. So you're a body without, that ability to have, if you have glucose comes in, then you have to stimulate with insulin to have that glucose go into the cells. And then you exercise for an hour, which is wonderful, but you're only going to have that stimulatory effect then and for the period, shortly after that. Versus imagine a person who's standing and kind of moving around most of the day and taking a little 1 to 2 minute walk around their house every 30 minutes. A quick walk, you're activating every muscle group, right? Like you're activating your quads, your hamstrings, your abs, everything. You're pushing those glucose channels to the cell membrane. That person, even though they've only probably had to commit like 20 minutes throughout the day cumulatively to kind of move a little bit, they have kept those channels there all day. It's a different biology. It's a different body. And so we have to shift it from exercise to we need movement built into the fabric of our lives. Now, so many of us are knowledge workers now, like you and I, and pretty much everyone, we probably know, like it used to be that like over 70% of Americans were in agriculture. Now it's less than 2%. Like our
Wow.
world has changed and we're not going back. That's fine.
Yep.
So what we need to do if we want to be healthy, and
Yes.
I'm sorry, it's just the way it is, we have to take stock of how we're spending our time each day and convert sitting activities to standing or moving activities. We just have to. And if that sounds like something that's not possible, then it's taking intentional breaks every 30 minutes to do 10 air squats or to walk for 2 minutes, which the research actually shows that that little amount of movement has a huge impact. So for me, what that's looked like is like, you know, I just basically sit down and look at everything I do each day. I've done this in the past, and it's like I cook breakfast, I brush my teeth, I am having to do, either host podcasts, be on podcasts, write newsletters, open my mail, obviously connect with my partner, cook dinner, catch up with friends, whatever it is. How can I make each of those movement based? And so part of that is having a treadmill desk, which I just absolutely love.
Send
But a
us
lot
the
of
link.
yeah, I will. I will. Yeah. I mean, they are now $120 on Amazon. It's
Oh, really?
it's the best money that you can possibly spend. And um I go so slow. I'm at like 1 mile an hour. I don't even know I'm doing it, and
Love
yet
it.
I sleep better. So there's a research paper I mentioned in the book that shows that they did an intervention with treadmill desks for 2.5 hours per day. So just 2.5 hours in the workday with 10 participants. And they lost on average 2.6 pounds of fat in that 10 days and put on about 2 pounds of lean muscle during that.
Wow.
And they extrapolated in that paper, which they did not actually do this study, but they extrapolated that people could lose 44 pounds a year by walking at a low speed for 2.5 hours a day while working. So that's incredible. And then just on top of that, the other piece of data that blew me away when writing this book was that the correlation between step count and health outcomes. So really top tier journals, Journal of American Medical Association, published research showing that people who walked just 7,000 or more steps per day
Yep.
they followed them for about 10 years, had a 50% lower chance of all-cause mortality in the follow-up period than people who didn't walk that much. The average American is walking 3,500 to 4,000 steps a day. That is like, takes 30 minutes. So it's basically cumulatively in a 24-hour period, they're walking about like 30 minutes to an hour. It's just not conducive with cell biology that is healthy. So
Yes.
that's the practical tip is to find ways to inject 1 to 2 minutes of movement throughout the whole day. Make sure you're not sitting for like 3 hours at a time. It doesn't need to be walking. It's just moving muscles, and treadmill desks are great.
Oh
So
my
that's
God, that's brilliant. And I loved that part of your book. Actually, that was the one I was hoping you would cover was the movement part. I'm just gonna, if we do you have time, I just want to wrap up
yeah.
with that. So I want to wrap up. We started with your mom. And I want to read from your chapter on fearlessness because I thought everyone's going to go read the book. They're going to get all the different things on how to optimize sleep and nutrition and what not to eat. Just by the way, oat milk's on the no list, people. I was like, oh, I have a lot of friends who love their oat milk. But this piece of it I thought was really critical. And you share from the time you were a child, you were worried about death. I think a lot of people can relate to this, by the way, and losing the people you love. And it inspired your decision to go into medicine. And you said when your mom was dying, she said, your death is uncontrollable and is okay. I feel that because when I held my mother as she took her last breath, she was okay. In her final waking moments, she whispered to me that we are here to protect the energy of the universe. That is all. The life, the death was perfect. I was so moved by that piece of it. This connects again to your mission is so much bigger. I mean, yes, we're going to learn how to optimize our health and move our bodies and love ourselves but we're going to understand how we're connected to the divine, to the universe, to the stardust, to the sun, to the like it's so profound what you've written. And I'm so I got a little teared up there. I'm sorry when I did that for you.
Yeah.
But it's so beautiful, and the peacefulness around your mom's death. I just talk to us about fearlessness because stress and all of this thing, just as a way to close, and also just to honor your mom, Gail, because it was such a beautiful way to end your book
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
in an
you.
important way, an important.
I think it's the most important piece of the whole thing because fundamentally, I think the world we're living in really wants us to be scared and really wants us to, because when we're scared, we're controllable. We look to things outside of us to assuage and mitigate our existential anxiety. So it's everything from the violence coming in on our phone from all over the world, the TV, the all the sensationalist media around, I mean, everything. I mean, what could be more scary than a global pandemic, and it was just streaming into our eyeballs. And then on top of this, in our Western culture, we are also just like existentially afraid of death. I mean, I think as I've studied so many other cultures throughout my life, you know, Western tradition, I'm sorry, Eastern traditions and Taoism and Buddhism and ancient, Chinese poetry and Rumi and Sufi and all these things, like all of that, the Stoics, they're all thinking about, talking about, meditating on death in a very fearless way. And that is not what we do here in the West. We actually don't talk about it. We're really scared of it. We're very despiritualized here. We think of very binary view of life and death, of where like we're alive and we're this body, we're this thing, and then we die and we're gone. And that sounds really scary. And I think that so on every level, on the information coming to us through everything, billboards, phones, TVs, the newspaper, to the highest level, which is, our existential fear of mortality, coupled with kind of a culture that is very individualistic. We don't have our elders to help give us counsel about just regular personal traumas that we might deal with throughout our lives. Like we're all going to experience hardship, but we don't have community. We don't have really great community built into our culture. We also just really look down upon the idea of mental health care because it's like, we just have a stigma still around like strategy. So it's like our culture has made us scared, and we're even scared of our own internal voices. We're told not to trust them. So what does that do? We have a body that is constantly living bathed in stress hormones and an energetic neurologic grip of fear. And anything that is causing our bodies and cells to put energy towards fear response, defense, alarm is going to take away from the energy we can put towards thriving, repair, and reaching really that highest level of health. And that's on the biologic level. Like stress and fear hurts our mitochondrial function. You have a section of the book called Fear Crushes Good Energy. People might be thinking that the world is scary. Like there is violence and there are school shootings and there are wars and there is a pandemic. Like it's true. But I think the irony is that when we just accept the reality and are curious, engage with the fact that we all are going to die, like in the next few decades, I mean, at most someone listening, we've got 60, 70 years, it's like, it's going to happen. So we have to accept it. Like it's the world is scary. So our most fundamental job is to create a sense of safety in our bodies so that while we're here, our bodies can do their best work. So that's the key piece is like, it's our most fundamental job to identify what's putting that grip of fear into our minds and bodies and be the parent for our own thoughts to create, it's kind of like fake it till you make it. Like, yeah, like create that sense of safety. I think a lot of that safety, one of the unlocks, at least for me in my life, has been going down the spiritual journey and exploring that more, because as I feel more connected to the eternal nature of life and the world, it has released me in some ways from that grip of fear of that binary death. And so for some people to have a spiritual journey, for others, it might literally just be, like I said, fake it till you make it, where like you can think different thoughts. You can think like, I am safe. Right now, I am safe. And 5 minutes from now, I'm still safe. And I'm comfortable. And I'm okay. I'm having this wonderful conversation with Michele. Like, I'm actually okay. That's your choice. So use your thoughts to create a sense of safety in your body, no matter what, because you cannot change the reality of the world around you by thinking fearful thoughts. What you can change is the reality inside your body by thinking safe thoughts. And that will help you then build cellular health that lets you shine your brightest light and lets you show up in the world in a way where you can make the most difference, you know? And so that's really the last chapter of the book, is that fearlessness is the highest level of good energy. And it's probably the hardest work we have to do. But I'm not a religious person. I'm very spiritual, but I think giving a lot of that work over to the spirit realm, to my ancestors, to God, to source, like truly handing it over and saying, like, this is a lot. Like, can you help me feel that sense of fearlessness? It's really helpful. So that's just one thing I would share.
It's so beautiful. And it's interesting because Dr. Gladys, in different words, said the same thing. 103-year-old Dr. Gladys, yes.
Oh,
She
wow.
literally said the same thing. And we were talking about fear. So it's sort of interesting because it just happened to be interviewing you both on the same day. And yeah, just the
Can't wait
story
to
you
listen.
told. Oh, yeah, she's so
Well, and
lovely.
she, she's closer. I mean, well, we all never know, but like, and the fact that people like that, her or my mother, my mom when she was dying, and Gladys at 103 are saying that, it's like, don't take it from me, take it from these people who have lived. And so it's beautiful.
It is
Wow.
beautiful. And it's also, it's healing to hear. And it's also, yes. And just the story you told going back to see where your mom, when she was pregnant with you and coming upon that book written by a woman with the same name. I think that the world is, that there are angels around us or whatever your belief system, spirit guiding you to remember. There's no coincidence here in my mind that the messaging is the same. We're coming home to ourselves. We're coming home remembering that I think we're souls having a human experience, and we have to get reconnected to the truth of why we're here, to love our bodies, do what we can to empower ourselves, remember the connectedness to something bigger than us. We know it, we feel it. Like I said, I read your book, I nodded. You were reminding, you were bringing me home to my truth and to my soul. And that's what your book did. Anything you want to say before we wrap up today, Dr. Casey, to the women listening,
Oh my gosh.
women midlife ladies around the world?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm in such awe of women. And I think that, I guess the one thing, since, I know that your audience is mostly women, I think they're, one of I have two favorite paragraphs in the book that are both in that chapter on fearlessness as good energy. And they're really written to women, because I think one of the most miraculous things about women, and the thing that I think is almost that most devastates me about our Western culture, is how we have separated women from the sense of their like total like divinity, and the fact that women are a force in the world that creates life. That I agree with your paradigm of that we are souls in a human body. And so I think about pregnancy, I think about women as literally being this like alchemal home for merging the spirit world with a body, to have pulling us, spirit out of the spirit world into a body. Obviously that is in conjunction with men, but it's happening inside the woman's body. And that is just, I mean, it almost brings me to tears thinking about,
Yes.
and just growing up in this sort of like post-feminist, like climb the corporate ladder, and how dissociated became from my femininity. And it's just that it's our job. It's no one else's job. It's our job as women to rediscover, to not to rediscover, it's all within us. So to unpeel the layers of what culture has done to help separate us from that nature. No one's going to do it for us. And it's actually just not smart to be blaming the patriarchy, or it's like, we have to believe in our divine nature to bring that to the world. So don't wait for someone else to give it to you. It's like, we have to really get in touch with that. And and I think that when we can really embody that goddess energy, like you talked to Sarah, like she brings that goddess energy of
She does.
what that power is, and really realize that like that light is so special and worth protecting. It makes it so much easier, I think, to like, quote unquote, set boundaries, and say no. These things that every woman's having a problem with. Everyone's overwhelmed. Everyone's doing too much. Everyone's overgiving. I don't want to say everyone, but I hear this so much. And it's like, step one is remembering, I think, the divine power that we have as women, as portals, and and then not letting any, I mean, and then the second piece is recognizing that all life-giving forces in our world are cyclical. You look at the soil, it's summer, fall, winter, spring. Women, menstruation, follicular, ovulation, luteal. Cycles are required for life. And our modern world has basically said, oh, no, no, no. Cycles are not okay because you're not productive during the yin period of the cycles, winter, menstruation. You just got to keep working. When you try to outsmart cycles, life stops being able to be made. That's what we're seeing with industrial agriculture. We are basically saying like, oh, no, 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 winter. We don't need winter. We're going to have endless summer by pushing the fields to be productive all the time. No cover crops. No, we're just going to push, push, push. And for women, push, push, push. You need to work all the time, all 30 days. You got to be on. You got to be doing everything for your kids, everything. So we have basically, with our monumental hubris, thought that, oh my God, well, there's these down phases of the cycle. So we're just going to squeeze more out of it. You don't get more productivity from squeezing. You get productivity from honoring cycles. And again, it's women's job to internalize that, believe it, and feel the confidence to protect that power and light. Because when you internalize it, I do believe that others around you will respect it. But we're not even respecting it for ourselves. And we expect other people to respect it for us. We have to do that work. So that's the message I want to leave people with is like, I do think, and this is just my own personal experience, when I have become more in touch with that sort of spirituality within, especially as a woman, it's become a lot easier to set really rigid boundaries in my life because I know how important it is to protect my life, not only for me, but for the fundamental life-giving force on planet Earth, which is, women and soil and other things that can create that alchemy. So, yeah.
You are such a force. That just made me really emotional. I could just feel it. Like I could feel again the truth, just like I did in your book. I'm so grateful and honored you are here today to talk about good energy, the surprising connection between metabolism and limitless health. When this interview airs, this will be out in the world. So pick up a copy and you will thank me for picking up a copy. There's so much goodness in it. And Dr. Casey, I'm so grateful to you. Thank you for everything you shared today and for putting this book out. I think it took a lot of courage to put this book out because you go against a lot of the paradigms. Oh, that's weird. There's fireworks. Did you see that?
It's a Zoom hand gesture, but it was perfect because it was like a fireworks display.
I don't know what that was. It's like my Aura ring. That's like
for people listening. We just did like a fist pump type of thing, and then Zoom did
fireworks.
A firework display. It was
it's so feeling the energy, feeling the good energy. And it's so funny. I came off with Dr. Gladys feeling good energy. So this stays about. It's like it's all aligned. I'm telling you.
Oh, you are good at it. So this is
beautiful.
You're
sweet. Thank you so much. I don't know what that was. I'm like, well, it's not doing it now. That's so weird. I swear to God, that was something spiritual. I don't know.
Gladys, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know what that was. People will have to watch this on YouTube now.
Yeah, on YouTube. Yeah.
Where do you want me to direct people to find you?
Well, pretty much everything I do is funnels into CaseyMeans.com, CaseyMeans, and you can learn more about the book there on the book page, all my blog posts, newsletters, social links, and everything like that. I'm at Dr. Casey's Kitchen on Instagram, and I'm at Casey Means MD on every other platform. But yeah, I would say please, yes, read the book. I'd love to hear your thoughts for people who pick it up. And then I really pour my heart and soul into my newsletter every week. So that's another place, Good Energy Living. And that's just another place to get more. So yeah.
Perfect. And I will link everything in the show notes over at thegoodlifecoach.com so you can find this easily. It'll even be on your podcast player. You can link directly to Dr. Casey's book and her website and share this with every woman. Like literally, this is how we reclaim our power and our feminine power and our health and our well-being. So share this widely, broadly. And Dr. Casey, I look forward to continuing to see your beautiful work in the world. This has been truly such an honor to be sitting with you, to learn from you. And again, I can't thank you enough for your book, Good Energy.
Thank you so much, Michele.
Thank you. Hey, friend, I have one request before we sign off today. If you've gained any value from any of the interviews that you've tuned into, would you take just 1 minute and leave a 5-star rating and review over on Apple Podcasts? It's actually how more women can find the show, and I want to continue growing a community of women who are loving themselves and living full on. So thank you for all of your support, and I look forward to being back with you next week. Bye for now.
This podcast is presented for entertainment and educational purposes only. Any information provided is not intended to be a substitute for medical, mental health, or other professional advice. Seek out your trusted healthcare provider or other qualified professional for all matters dealing with your health and well-being. Any opinions or information provided by a guest are their own and not those of Michele Lamoureux or the company.